Good evening. Welcome to the Spiritual But Not Religious Show. I'm your host, George Lewis. I'm really pleased that you're here tonight. I've got a great guest for this evening. I also have a superb guest for next week. Tom's been having a little trouble tonight getting things set up here on a technical basis, so but I think we're ready to go now. First, let me talk with you a bit about next week's guest first. Her name is Jill Donlevy. Jill Donlevy, and she is I'm going to read this to you so that she's got a great billing. She's just been around television and stars, and she's very, very well known. She's the #1 love psychic in the world, and she was quoted in the book 100 Top Psychics as being that. Dateline NBC says Jill is so on target with her predictions they were amazed. She's a sought-after psychic to the stars, and her lifetime of works has catapulted her into the world-renowned fame. Her life was chronicled on Lifetime television as the #1 love psychic for all of the marriages and relationships she has predicted throughout her life, over 1,000 to date. And she's embedded in Ripley's Believe It or Not as the most amazing teenage psychic. This was in 1977, and she's been on radio and television since she was 6 years old. So you want to be sure and tune in next week. She's going to make a great guest. I have a really superb lady with us tonight who wrote a book called The Prodigal Family. It's actually a spiritual roadmap for family reconciliation. And Johanna Maaghul, and she's just one of the things that impressed me the most about Johanna, and I'm going to get her ready to bring her on here very shortly, is that it's very obvious from her book that she's done the work, and she's really brought this family of hers into a healthy kind of a sphere and integrated the many things that need integration in order to heal some of the family wounds. And you know what? Doesn't matter who you are, I guarantee you've got some kind of baggage there from your childhood. We just all do. We can be in the most perfect family there is, and we're still going to have that. Have we got Johanna on the phone? Johanna?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I have you there. Let me I got you up about as much volume as I can, so we'll give that a try for a minute. We may need to do something about the volume. Let me push you on the air here with live video.
Okay.
And push you on air, and there we go. You should be able to see yourself now.
Yes.
I've been looking forward to talking with you, Johanna. I'm impressed with your work, the book that you've written. It's well written, and I was just telling the audience that it's very obvious to me that you did the work. This is not an opinion kind of a book. So let's get started though with a little bit about who you are, so that our viewers can get their head around why you've done this kind of work. Maybe you can give us a bit of a bio up to why you even bothered to write this work, and a sense of who Johanna is.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. And who am I? Well, first of all, I want to address your point that it's interesting that I have done the work, but I think I'm still doing the work.
Absolutely, aren't we all?
Yeah, and the book is a great testament to that, I'm sure, as I try to reveal some of my own humilities in the stories I present in the book. My own story is that I went through a round of treatment for breast cancer about 3 years ago now. And during that process, I found that being reduced down to sort of a different person than I had known myself to be, I started to try to evaluate what were some of the important things in my life that I thought had left me without having a good sense of myself for so long, and what had finally brought me back to that. And as I started to look at those things, I found that my family story and even my husband's family story and some of the things that we brought together to build a family became more and more important for me to understand. So that was probably the first direction that I went with.
So tell me, how much do you attribute the cancer as being a kind of a life-altering experience for you that propelled you into this? Had you been thinking about writing the book before that, or?
That's a good question. I've always been a writer. I've always journaled and done technical writing and done different forms of writing. But this came with an urgency. This writing happened in a very different form. And when I started writing after I came out of the cancer, I actually wrote a whole first book that I didn't do anything with.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and after that, then I think that was a clearing. I think some people say that it's, you need to do some autobiographical writing. And after that, I started thinking about what was really important to me and what did I want to share and what was my message. If I were to have a message, what would it be?
Right.
My message is that if we can turn the lights on with our families of origin and our family ancestry, there's a lot we can learn and a lot we can share with our children and our grandchildren without having to feel bad that we've been through some of these things.
Right. So, all right, let's get on to the book a little bit, because there's a lot in there I really want to talk with you about, and I'm sure we have more to talk about tonight than what we're going to have time. So, what I'm going to try and do is really hit the highlights. Why don't you tell our viewers where they can purchase your book? Where's the best place to go? To your website?
The best place to go is the website. You can get it at theprodigalfamily.com. You can also search for it. Just go to Amazon and get it there. But I have a link to it on the website. You can also go to your bookstore or your library and order it if you'd prefer to do that, if you want to support your local book vendors and library as well. But it's always available online through the website or Amazon.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, folks, one of the best things to do is go right to her site, because the authors, like, we struggle a bit on the money front sometimes, and actually the author can make just a couple of cents more on a book if you go directly to her site. Johanna, your book starts out about having some guiding principles, and I think they're really important, and I thought maybe what we could do is go through those one at a time and kind of give a brief synopsis. But before we do that, why do we even need any guiding principles in order to do this work?
Well, I think we need guiding principles to do this work because there's a lot wrapped around the idea of what family healing means.
Right.
And one of the principles in the book actually came out of a conversation I had with somebody, which is the idea, I'll just jump to it for a second because I think it is important here, is that we must heal around that which cannot be healed.
Absolutely.
And when somebody voiced that to me, I felt a huge relief. I realized that I don't have to wait for my family to heal in the sense that I think they need to heal, first of all, because that may not be true.
Right.
And secondly, I don't necessarily have to reconcile with people in my family the way that I might think that should be in order to heal myself. So the 4 guiding principles are really about getting sensitive to that and realizing that those are not things we need to do.
Well, before we go there, I think you hit a really vital core to this whole family healing stuff. And that's around this idea of reconciliation, because at some point you have to get to forgiveness. And when we've got somebody who's been incested, whether it's the boy by the mother or the daughter by the father or the brother or the uncle or however it comes about, that's a terrifying idea to reconcile with the perpetrator. And just knowing that that's not where we have to go. Am I correct?
Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
That's really what it's about. And I spend a lot of time recently doing workshops with people where we talk about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. It's a very important lesson, and I do have even a chapter in the book on why forgiveness is so confusing.
Right.
It often sends people running the other way for the very reason you're talking about. I don't want to see that person again. They're the reason I'm, struggling to begin with, and that person may not have grown or changed or have any sense of remorse even. And it can be a dangerous thing to reconcile on this physical planet with that person in this lifetime.
Absolutely dangerous. You bet.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Well, so your first guiding principle, I just wanted to lay that groundwork so that anybody that's out there listening and they've got some horror in their history that they want to deal with, but are frightened. I just want to kind of ease their mind a little bit. I've worked with some people that have had incest in their background, and that just, like that whole idea, knowing it out front kind of relaxes everything so that you can tend to move forward a bit more. Your first guiding principle is take no prisoners. What are we talking about there?
Well, what we're talking about is that when you when you're on a quest for yourself, on this journey of healing for yourself, you have to realize that you may have to take that journey alone. And even though the process may involve healing around what's going on in your family, you can't really take anybody from your family with you in that journey.
Right.
As much as you might want to, that is not really the point. The point is for you to find forgiveness first with yourself and find some healing with yourself. And maybe you open yourself to a later reconciliation, but you can't make that sort of the number one priority of what you're going to do in this journey.
I found that to be absolutely true in my world. I started doing this kind of work back in the late 80s, early 90s. And, part of what I needed to do was work with my father, who had died when I was 6. And so he just wasn't available. That had to happen at the gravesite. And as importantly was with my sister, who not through any fault of her own, just really wasn't available. And it's been later years that, in the last few years that she and I have been able to do this work and do some reconciling, but I didn't let it stop me for exactly the reason you're talking about.
Yeah.
How did that work for you? Was everybody available to you, or what was your experience with that whole thing about your family and their participation?
Well, it's interesting. I had some particular issues where I am in non-agreement with family members, and what I have learned is, there's two answers to that. The first thing is that I think I went through a phase of actually trying to force that.
Right.
Trying to say, this is what I need from you, and I need you to understand this about me and what's happened, and if you can't, I can't have a relationship with you. That was sort of my first, like putting a demand on somebody. And then the second piece was realizing that everybody gives in their own way, and everybody is only capable of what they're capable of. And that's part of the forgiveness, is realizing that these people, as you say, they weren't available for me in the way that maybe I expected it.
Right.
But in their minds, they were available to me, and they actually continue to be available to me in the ways that they are, if that makes sense.
It does. The other thing that was like a real, I guess, light bulb went on in working with my sister. We were both in the same household with the same mother. And yet we had completely different experiences. We remembered situations differently. And it was just hearing that and understanding that her experience was really valid, my experience was really valid, but they were two totally different experiences.
Yeah, and that's very true. I mean, that's exactly how siblings experience life. They experience their parents as completely different people.
Absolutely.
And so that's another important thing to kind of come to terms with, especially, and we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, but especially with the sibling relationship, which is why I think it's actually the most challenging.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is the most challenging. Johanna, did you have a guide? Were you in therapy, or did you have a guide that was helping you with this? Did you, just kind of do this on your own, or what was your process?
Wow, that's a good question. My guide, I think it was a collective guide.
Uh-huh.
I think it was, I began doing a lot of work reading and listening to podcasts like we're doing today, and I felt a guidance coming from somewhere that I knew was safe. I knew I could keep going and it would be okay. But I didn't have somebody in particular that guided me. But that's a really, really interesting question. I never thought about that.
Well, that's a pretty courageous thing just to realize, and pretty insightful on your part to realize that you could. Had you read a bunch of books, or just this was just kind of intuitive?
It was intuitive, but then I think going through the cancer allowed me to put a name to it. And I remember I was listening to a few podcasts, and there was an interview with Deepak Chopra, and he was talking about consciousness being primary and matter being the epiphenomenon, which I thought was a very powerful statement. And just the idea of the flipping moment for me was realizing that our spirit is very, very powerful, and it's a guiding force that is stronger than our physical bodies.
Absolutely.
So with that model, I started looking differently at the whole paradigm of my life and my family, and then that's when I knew I was sort of being called to write this book and to continue to do this work.
I completely understand what you're talking about, having written a book and sometimes wondered if it was me writing the book. That there is this guidance that we get connected to. And sometimes that's a little hard for somebody who hasn't had the experience to really connect to that. But there's a truth and an honesty that we can connect to on that inner level that we can't get anywhere else.
That's right. Right. And as you say that, I think also the book writing process is a guide.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, as a friend of mine kept telling me, well, maybe you're not writing the book, maybe the book's writing you. So
that was my experience. The book wrote. Yeah, absolutely. So all right. So your second principle is heal around. We talked about that a little bit. Heal around that which cannot be healed. Pardon?
As we were talking about, that's just really realizing that there are certain things that will stay as they are, and that you need to move beyond them if you want to become truly whole. And I think the incest that you're talking about is particularly poignant in that, because it's one of the few things in our society that we do not have any real healing for. We don't have it in the justice system. We don't have it in the psychiatric world. I mean, there's not much there for healing in that world. So, what do you do with that?
Yeah, unfortunately, you are so right on that. There isn't, and people who have been incested really have a struggle. My heart is with them. It's just a very difficult area.
Yeah.
Your third one is each of us has our own hero's journey, even within our own family. Why don't we talk a bit about what the hero's journey is?
Yeah, the hero's journey, which struck me when I was when I was just editing the book, and I went back and made a lot of rewrites to it based on that, was the idea that the prodigal son, which is also a paradigm we use in the book, is a very similar model to the hero's journey, in that he has a separation, a transformation, and then a return, or a reintegration.
Right.
And for a lot of people, where they get stuck is on that third place. So that understanding what is your coming home, what does that look like? And it may not necessarily be a physical coming home, just like we talked about in the first guiding principle.
Right.
So a coming home is a very, there's a lot to that, and that's really, I think, what a lot of the work is.
I think you're exactly right. That's the difficult part, isn't it?
Yeah.
A lot of the other stuff early on is kind of head stuff. It's recognition, but some of this stuff really gets into my willingness, and my fear, and like I found the will really played a huge part in this for me, to the point that I am. And I'm with you. There's this place where, I've done a lot of healing, but there's still more to do. And I'm not sure that we ever get done with it. And I'm not sure at all that we do. At least it certainly hasn't been that way in my world. And I have a family member that, although I tried to reconcile with, it just went back into the same thing that was the problem to begin with. And so I had to, leave that person out of my life in order to continue. So It's there's no set pattern, is there?
No, there's not a set pattern, and that's an interesting thing that you brought up about an attempted sort of reconciliation, because I also believe we're on a spiral. It's like the medicine wheel. I've been working with a woman in Sonoma, and we are doing some workshops that integrate the medicine wheel, and the idea that it's not a linear process, that it kind of goes around and comes back again,
right,
is interesting, especially if you consider the story of the prodigal son and his father. And maybe one of the things, think about is not necessarily to always identify with the son as the person that goes out and comes back, but identifying with the father, being in longful waiting.
Right.
And with a relative that may even be your parent, you may sit for years in longful waiting, but you may be in a good place to do that. And that may be a helpful thing for them to know that you're there. I mean, they might not even know they're there, but in your own heart, you know that you made that effort and you did that work to try to reconcile, and it wasn't the right time, and you still hold your place. You hold your place of love and forgiveness, and if there's another opportunity for that to come back around, you're in the right place.
That's so very important. Early on, what would happen with me, I'd work out an issue, some kind of a thing that was an issue, and think that I had it handled, and the problem was taken care of, only to somewhere down the road have it appear again, almost the same, but in kind of a bit of a different form. And I'd think, God, I thought I worked that through. It took me a while to really get a hold of this spiral idea that you talked about. And for me, what I began to recognize that second time where that issue would come back is I'm now dealing with that same issue, but from a different level of consciousness. And so I get it in a richer, deeper, more meaningful way than I did, the first time. Yeah,
and you're dealing with another person's hero's journey as well. So the fact that you are in a certain place in a certain level of consciousness, they're going around the spiral as well, and where you meet up on that spiral is always interesting. But I really believe that it's all about keeping that effort alive and keeping that consciousness and awareness of that. That's an important thing for you to put intention into in your lifetime, is healing that relationship, which a lot of people don't do because they give up. It's sad, but it's also, as we talked about earlier, it can be frightening to always keep yourself open for that hurt again as well.
Not just can be, it is. It's it's the kind of thing we definitely want to seal ourselves off from. And I think, if I recall, you also talk about that if we don't do this work, that we can't be all that we are.
That's right.
We just can't. We are not going to reach the top of our dreams, our aspirations, and our abilities without getting those pieces of us back together. Because what I found, and you tell me if this is true in your understanding, is the pain that I hold. It's held somewhere in my body. I think it's in my head, but the truth, it's held in my body with energy. And as I've let you loosen that up and allow that release, that energy's come back to me. I found that I've become more vital and more energetic because of doing the work.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I think that the idea of having your body be the holder of the truth is why so many of us, I believe, deal with what we deal with. We deal with the stress and the physical. I mean, I'm a big believer that you can have post-traumatic stress just from having experiences in your childhood.
Yeah, I missed part. You can have what?
You can experience a lot of post-traumatic stress.
Oh, for sure.
Around experiences from your childhood.
Yes.
And your body will carry those until you have found a way to release them fully.
Right.
And it's like, I don't want to say fully because it's a continuous process. But certainly the more space you can clear up in your soul and in your body to be that person that you really truly are, the more you release that dream of what your family should have been, which I believe is what holds people back. It's a betrayal in a sense. I'm betraying my family by becoming this other person that they don't really understand or recognize, or so it's forgiving. It's almost forgiving yourself and all of them for not being able to live up to that dream.
Absolutely. The other thing was in my experience, I had times where I didn't have the courage. I did not have the courage to move forward, and I had to wait. And finally, something would happen and it would change, and I could move forward. And my intent really was to heal, but there were points where I couldn't muster what it took to do that.
I can relate to that a lot. I think if I were to lay out all the characters from The Wizard of Oz, it's definitely the lion for me too.
Right? Yeah.
I struggle with courage, and I try to be always accommodating and be thoughtful of other people, but I'm realizing that that's not going to work. I have to have the strength, as a friend of mine just told me this evening, not just heart, but strength also.
Absolutely.
And when we've grown up in families where we weren't really allowed to have that, it didn't work, it's a foreign thing to us.
It can be definitely not only foreign, it's taboo.
Yeah,
very difficult. So the fourth guiding is we are not immune to our environment. That's pretty important. Can you give us an idea of what we're talking about there?
Well, I think that it goes back to what we were just talking about, how we're affected by that environment.
Right.
And to have an illusion that doesn't matter, or just to get over it, or be tough, or everything that goes on in a home within a family, it's an ecosystem.
Right.
And it's human beings are sensitive creatures, as much as we would like to think otherwise. And because the family and the home becomes a natural place to dump everything sometimes, it's really important to remember that it's a sensitive environment, and that if we come home and we just kind of lash out because we had a stressful day on our spouse or our kids, it's just you're contaminating the water. And the same thing with the water that you came from, and just recognizing that's a very powerful place, that home. And even though you only spent a fraction of your life there.
Right. Well, you go on and you get into this a little bit further, and you talk about the environment for our children and the importance of every family conversation that we have in front of our children. Why don't you expand on that a little bit for those folks who really would like to stop this before it ever gets started in their own family with their children?
Well, I think two things about that. One is, like you said, I mean, there's a desire to heal, but we can't always heal at the time that we want to. So take that into account when then we become a parent, and then we find ourselves still behaving in ways that we wouldn't want to behave if we'd chosen, but they're in our bodies.
Right.
And I believe a really strong healing part of that is having a conversation with your children about what's going on, and that can be very powerful, because your children are really your best teachers at that point, because they're born without what you have, and more innocently. And I think that if they're given the chance, they will speak the truth.
If they're given that safe environment to do it in, right? That's
right. So I find it sort of a meeting ground. The person that comes from the family that wasn't exactly what they would have wished for, but they want to create a family of their own. There's going to be tension. Because as they watch their children grow, it's going to remind them of the things that they didn't have. And so it's really about just getting honest with that tension with yourself and with your children, and creating a way for them to understand their history that they can take with them, so that if they do struggle with any of it, at least they have the information that we might not have had.
One of the things that I found really interesting was the interaction that you and your husband had or have with your children, and how if I recall, your husband has kind of a sarcastic humor that he sometimes uses.
Yeah.
Share that with us a bit, if you would, because I think that runs in most families. The husband comes home. Yeah.
My husband will come home and he'll have had a long day, and he'll use sarcasm or humor to try to make a point with the kids. That the house might be really messy, or just nobody's listening to him, and there's a lot to kind of get back in order. And the thing with my kids is if I step in the middle of that and I start I don't know, sort of directing him or managing him, let's say, it just creates a bigger mess.
Right.
But when I step out of the room, and I let him work that through with his kids and my kids, they'll tell him, Dad, I get what you're saying. You don't have to make that kind of joke about it, or whatever that is, and it will shift very quickly. But the difference, I think, is that there is that dialogue between my kids and him, and me too. I mean, I have my things that go both ways with them also. But I think the important thing as parents is to try to find ways where we can step out of that role of feeling like we have to control and manage the relationship that our children have with our spouse.
Have you dealt with any couples or anyone who one or the other spouse really doesn't want to show up for this at all, and there's only like the wife trying to work through these issues with the family?
I certainly know a lot of people who are in that place.
Right.
And I feel very grateful that I have a marriage. My husband has, I think, very similar views in terms of how he sees the world and raising children. So we are very aligned in that. We know we both have had struggles, but that we don't want to pass those along, and we want to try to create a better environment through being honest.
Yeah, I think that happens in a lot of marriages. But boy, there are so many marriages out there that the husband's not available. Sometimes the wife's not available. More often, I think it's with the husband not being available. How about with divorced families? Do you do much work with families who have a divorce with this? And do you work with the family or just with like one individual? What do you find? Are your workshops pointed towards both family and or to the individual?
Well, that's a really good question. I came from a divorce myself, so although I haven't experienced it personally, I certainly understand the pain of it, and I was witness to my own parents' divorce, as you know from the book.
Right.
But I think that the model of how to deal with divorce is very much about goes back to the four guiding principles of healing, again, of taking no prisoners and healing around that which cannot be healed, which for a spouse who is now trying to raise a family with somebody they no longer live with, who they can't even get along with, is a very challenging proposition. So I do a lot of work with divorce, and I have in my letters in the back of the book a very detailed letter writing exercise for people who have been through divorce. And there's a lot of healing that is dependent, I think, in divorce on first forgiving yourself, and then really finding forgiveness with this spouse. I think it's so important for the future of the rest of the generation, even if the divorce it needs to be.
And you hit on a really good point, and I want to point that out in your book, is that in the back of the book you have, like a lot of good things, exercises and letters and things to help move this process along, so that you don't just throw out a lot of good ideas, but you really guide the person through the whole process. And they're pretty excellent too in what I read. Yeah, there they are. So often, you read a self-help book and it tells you if you do this, this, and this, but there's no real step 1, step 2, step 3, and you're kind of left on your own. It's pretty hard on that kind of a basis.
Right.
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I don't want to belabor it, but your point about the spiral, I mean, it's going to take, if you can just make a step forward, if you can write a letter, and the letter doesn't have to say everything. The letter can just start a dialogue, and you don't even have to mail the letter. The letter can be a dialogue in your heart between somebody in your family that you are trying to work this through with, and it's really all about clearing the little space of intention.
Right.
And trying to bite off too much sometimes in that effort, because as you've seen, and I've seen, I mean, sometimes you will prematurely try to reconcile or demand something of somebody, and that's really not what's going to get you set free to clear more space for yourself, as you say.
Yeah, I've also found that letter writing does a couple of things, or at least it has for me. And one is it can tend to take any negative energy you're feeling off. It can really kind of dissolve that. You get a chance to have an outlet. And the other thing is it's very clarifying. you get more clarity, because a lot of this stuff is at least for me, was pretty muddy. Some of my memories weren't even all that valid.
Yeah. And you write, and you start to. And it's funny, as a writer, and yourself. I knew that this was going to be my path. This was going to be my path of healing, was to write, and so that's probably why I have such a passion for letter writing too, because I believe it's equally as healing.
One of the men that I work with, every day in the morning and in the evening, writes 2 letters. He writes a letter to God and one from God. And he swears by it. It's amazing the kind of information that comes through from that God, higher self, wherever that might come from, depending on your belief system.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. Pretty powerful stuff.
I love that. Yeah, I have written letters to God myself.
Right.
And I love that whole model, especially in times when you're feeling the most vulnerable, because it can remind you that there's somebody listening when you feel like you're just not being heard at all.
Yeah, and you know what, Johanna, one of the things that I needed was some kind of higher power, like to give me the strength and the energy and the stuff that I needed to move forward sometimes. I could not have done the work that I've done without, you can call it God or the force or energy or universe, or it doesn't matter what you call it, but some power outside of yourself to really help you through this process. Was that your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially dealing with family, because if you think about it, isn't that where most people go for that support?
Absolutely.
So if you're struggling with family, it becomes all that more accentuated that that's what you're looking to try to find, is that guidance and that support from outside of yourself.
When talking about couples and marriages, and one of the points that you make is that how much the reason that people get married affects how they act within that relationship. Can you talk about that a little bit, about maybe some of the reasons and the effect, and maybe even what you can do about it?
Yeah, I think it was David Snarch's book, one of his books on marriage, where he talks about the reasons that people get married vary, but that once you're in the marriage, you have the same sort of tasks cut out for you.
Right.
And I think that you are family again. I mean, you are now, and the marriage is the only relationship in the family that's actually a choice, if you think about it. Everybody else is born into your life, and you don't have a choice. You don't choose your grandparents. You don't choose your parents. I mean, on a spiritual level, that can certainly be talked about.
Right.
But in our conscious earthly existence, we choose this person, and why we choose them, I think, has a lot of reasons. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that people get married, and it can be just where you are at that moment in your life, and But I think ultimately, remembering that your spouse that you married them because you love them, is sometimes a hard thing, and people lose sight of that. I don't know if I'm answering that question, but...
No, I think you are. I think you definitely are. Yeah, that's very easy to lose sight of, is why you married the person in the first place, because all the baggage from your childhood starts to come right into the bedroom with you, and right into the kitchen, and right into every area of your life.
Yeah. But if you can use that as an opportunity, in the sense of, okay, now I've attracted this person that brings back all of these things for me. How can I use that in a healing way? How can I use that to look deeper at myself and try to keep the work going? And remember, they're here to teach me. And I can blame them, or I can thank them for teaching me and making me stronger and trying to learn how I need to get through this.
Well, see, that really brings up another really important thing here, and that is, to do this work, I think we have to be able to show up and be willing to be self-honest, which is, that can be a bit of a struggle to begin with, but holding the idea that I want to heal, that's important. But how do you get people who are, they don't even, the idea of healing family stuff never occurred.
Not even interested in it.
Yeah.
I think that I really go back to the story of the prodigal son, and I think of the father, and I think that's who you sit with.
Right.
And that person is gone. They're gone on their own journey, and they may or may not return in the way that you want them to. There are a lot of people who are not interested in this, what we're talking about right now.
Oh, for sure.
And they have the same or maybe as difficult, challenges in terms of what they face, but they choose not to face it.
Right.
And I think also to go back to your point about incest and the difficult things that people go through. Another point about that is to remember some people don't have the strength or the courage, as you say, to face that. For all we know, it might destroy them. They may feel like, if I face that, I don't know how I will get up the next day.
Absolutely.
So there's a sense to me of we who have taken this on or who have been pushed just far enough to take it on are gifted with that, in a sense.
Yeah, I gifted is a good word. I really see it in my life as kind of a grace.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I look at the decisions I made to heal, and I on some level I'd like to take credit for making the decision, but there was a point just before making the decision, just a split second before, where something gave me the willingness to do that when I didn't have it before, and that for me is the moment of grace or gift, as you put it. You talk about getting down to the true self. What does that mean to you, our true self?
Well, I wrote in the book, I have a circle analogy that I use, which is 5 circles.
Right.
And there's an inner circle, which is what I call the true self.
Uh-huh.
There's a second layer outside of that, which is what I think of as our ego or our body. And then there's our family that we live with. And then there's our sense of livelihood, what we do for a living, how we interact in the community. And then finally a full sense of spirituality. And I talk about the true self as the self that is innate in who we are, that when we can really, really relax, that's who we're comfortable being. But in our childhood, we may not have had that fully embraced, not even for malicious reasons. We may have been raised with people who didn't understand us or didn't have any connection with us in some ways that allowed that part of us to be on a regular daily basis. So that's, I think, what I think of as the true self.
Right.
In context.
So the next thing I want to talk about, and I really would like to know, or like you to tell our viewers, what pushed you into to doing this work, and that is, you talk about drugs, alcohol, and addictions as being tools to facilitate this integration of our two selves. How do you mean that? Tell me what.
Well, I know the part of the book you're talking about, an essay, and I hope I explain this correctly because I don't want to. How do I say this? Well, I think that what I was trying to say in that particular passage of the book,
right,
is that I believe that people will often turn to drugs or alcohol or other sort of agents of that sort, not always to numb themselves from the outside world, although that's a big part of it, but to actually numb the stimulation away so that they can even find themselves. And although it's not always a successful effort, I wouldn't promote it. But I do think that that's a lot of what's behind alcohol use or drug use sometimes, is trying to reconnect with yourself and trying to turn off the voices of negativity that are going on around you in that environment. I mean, and I do find it interesting that a lot of our culture is on medication today. I mean, a lot of medication.
Well, absolutely.
And so what does that say? And how is that? I understand that that's a very different thing than drugs or alcohol in the non-prescription sense, but I think there's a thread there of numbing that that a lot of people are seeking, and that's because we're often overwhelmed with the experiences we're having emotionally.
Yeah, well, I think I've had a lot of experience with addictions, my own and with others' addictions for darn near 30 years. And darn near 30 years, not on the unhealthy side, but on the healthy side, 30 years. And my experience, what I've observed, is that you're really right on when you say that it's a tool to facilitate this integration, to start this work, because I'm convinced that foray initially and continued into drugs and alcohol is to shut those voices up. It is to get into our higher self, maybe even to find our way to union with God. Carl Jung talked about that, the Swiss psychiatrist. That's exactly, and I'm sure you're there. I've been privileged to see, people who are just really at the very bottom, and degradation and pain and misery and at a loss and nowhere to go. And then they go through, it's really the hero's journey that you talk about, and they go through a complete transformation. Same person, but 100% a different person from when they came into that healing process. It's very powerful to watch. Unfortunately, the thing that when you talk about drugs and alcohol to the majority of the people in the world, the thing that they think first is what they've seen on TV and the horror of the drugs and all of the things that are going on. Mexico, killing everybody, and I mean it's just a horror. So there's a great deal of stigma there, and we don't get a chance to see that healing recovery side that you talk about here. And I think that was very insightful on your part to realize that and see that. Do you think that there's an arrogance that we have that must be broken before we can come into this work, and that pain oftentimes affords us the humility to get there?
I think the pain forges a lot of humility. I think that's what I was saying earlier about being gifted with having enough pain, in a sense, to do the work. I mean, it becomes a survival mechanism. I mean, I've worked with some people in work groups who have been through so much, and I admire them so much because of their honesty, because they really can't afford to be anything but honest.
Exactly.
And that's the way they have to live their life to survive.
Right.
And those of us who maybe haven't, other people who haven't been through that level of pain or illness or stress or whatever you want to call it, they are in a different place because they might be okay, and they might be able to keep functioning fine with what they've been through.
Spiritual TV.
But I do think it's a gift in a sense of getting, like you were saying, that metamorphosis with people and watching that happen it's so amazing and powerful and beautiful to watch people transform into the self that they were really meant to be here.
I'm sure that's a big part of all of this for you in the workshops that you do, the joy that you get from helping people to come to that place of transformation and joy. It's a service that you can't get any other way, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But you can't really lead anybody there that doesn't want to be there, for sure.
No.
That's the other thing. And I'm so grateful for the people that are reading the book and coming to talk about it, because I think that it's exciting for me to meet people like this. It's like I'm finding this larger and larger audience of people, not just for my writing, but who understand what we believe.
Do you work with people by phone?
I am just starting to do some work with people by phone, and that's something I will probably put up on my website in the next month or so.
Yeah, I really recommend you do that. You have a great deal to offer, and I'm sure that a lot of people will benefit from that. Why don't you tell us your website again, so that anybody out there thinking about doing this kind of work can contact you? Maybe even give them your email address. And Tom can put it on our chat room.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really easy. It's theprodigalfamily.com. And if you want to send me an email, you can just send it. It's on the website under the contact info. It's info@theprodigalfamily.com.
And I think your book is only $14?
Yeah, $14.95.
Right.
Yeah.
Not $20. It's well worth the money. Let's talk a little bit about power struggles in relationships. The thing that I know I've yet to see a relationship that especially early on there isn't a power struggle to see who's really. I hate to use the term the alpha dog, but somebody is. So how does that affect all this? How does that affect the children? How does it affect the healing part of this?
I think it keeps coming back to humility and realizing when you're in a power struggle. My thought is always to first recognize that that's exactly what's happening.
Right.
Then to also, cool down. I mean, I think with a spouses, fighting or arguing, and even kids, one thing we try to teach in our house, and it's a constant learning effort, is if you're upset about something, you're not going to be a good communicator, and you're certainly not going to be a good listener. So take 10 minutes or a half hour and go be by yourself. So that's a big lesson. I mean, we have a house full of very strong people, and so when a power struggle happens, it's just really learning that it's not going to go anywhere. And
it can bring just a bunch of insanity too, can't it?
Yeah, it can. It just perpetuates more insanity. It totally does. Yeah.
So, one of the things that you said that really struck me, and I'm very curious as to how you see this. You suggest that the relationship between a parent and a child is actually mystical. What is that? What do you mean by that?
I think just the idea of being born to another human being or two human beings, and that you have. I mean, here you are, one of the most powerful relationships you'll ever have, and you're strangers, and you start out with this very lopsided relationship of I'm here to take care of you, and you're here to take care of me, and then as life progresses, that's not necessarily so anymore. But that hologram, that memory of that is forever there. And so learning to try to have like a healthy relationship with your parents in any situation, or to change that and become friends. And there's so much dynamic there, and there's so much that we project onto our children, that our children expect from us. And so I think there's a constant work of forgiveness going on with parents and children, of not being who I hoped you would be on both sides.
I think that this idea that you have here about the relationship is mystical, it's really important. It really gets lost because we see so much of life, and we discount it. We just don't give it the kind of credence that it should have. But it is mystical. It's like it's the life and the creation of life is phenomenal, but there's 6 billion people in the world, so we tend to get blunted by that whole thing. We've only got about 5 minutes left. I wanted to talk with you about the bond between siblings and the impact that has on healing relationships, and I wanted to talk with you. But what I'd like to do is spend the next couple of 3-4 minutes talking about what you would like to talk about. If there's something that we haven't, because we just haven't been able to talk about everything that we could, that you would like to really inject into the conversation.
Yeah, well, I think the sibling part would be a nice piece to close on.
Yeah, that'd be great. Why don't you...
As you mentioned earlier, I mean, the sibling relationship, you were talking about your sister, I mean, it's very complicated because of the very reason that it's born, when you have a sibling, you're automatically born into a triangle.
Right.
So where the parent-child relationship is one-on-one, is the second child is born, and now there's a triangle. And I do believe that all sibling relationships, to some extent, have that parent in them into later life. That parent is either in the room or, they're not even on the planet, they're not in the room, but their presence is still in there in that relationship. And for a sibling bond to recognize that, for two siblings to understand the importance of that is very critical in any healing that goes on between siblings.
That, the triangulation that you're talking about there really had a powerful effect with my sister and I, in that my mother really didn't want us to have a relationship. She was very insecure and jealous, and just for a lot of reasons. And there was a early in life I was the big brother, and the protector, and I liked that role, and I loved my sister very much. And then, we had this split for many years, where we just didn't. We lost so much that we, the riches we could have had. Now we're back, and we have a really good relationship, and we've helped one another fill in some of the blank spots of our story, which has been real important, So, and it's just given complete different viewpoints.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but it really speaks to your point about if I'm not mistaken, you were really saying that if you don't take how much of effect healing their sibling bond has on all of our other relationship healing.
Yeah, it's just, and they're your peers. I mean, they're your sort of family-based colleagues, if you could call it that.
Right.
So not have siblings in your life that you can trust and be close to, especially when things are tough, is really lonely and very painful, because you feel like, those are the people that should be walking you through this walk and enjoying your children together. And as you move forward, you're going to be around the same age in life. So not share life with your siblings, I think, is probably one of the loneliest things to experience.
So, Johanna sandwiched us in this evening. She has a really busy schedule. I appreciate that. You had something going on before the show, and I think you're due right about the time the show ends to start something else. Am I right?
I am. I'm doing a talk about the book for an upcoming workshop in Mill Valley, which is where I am right now. So I'm going to leave our discussion and start another one. But this has been a great place to get into a dialogue here, and I've really enjoyed talking to you. This has been great.
Yeah, it's been a good experience for me too, Johanna. And I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll get you the link for the video so that so you can share that.
That would be wonderful.
And maybe at some point in the future we'll actually meet. If you ever get in anywhere near Florida with your talks, let me know. I'd sure love to have a cup of coffee with you. That
would be great. I will certainly try to make my way to Florida.
That'd be great. So okay. You have a good night, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep, bye-bye. Well, that was really good. Tom, she is just a great guest. I tell you what, get her book. You will enjoy it. It's not a big read, but it's just jam-packed with all kinds of good information for you. Don't forget, next week's guest is Jill Dawn-Levy, and she is the #1 love psychic in the world. And I guess we're out of time. I'm George Lewis. Come back again next week. And in the meantime, don't forget to accentuate the positive and have a fantastic week.